As manufacturers create more and more electric cars but keep their gas-powered cars in the lineup as well, naming is really a thing that has become more and more of a challenge, and Audi is no exception to that policy. They've been using the term E-Tron to talk about pretty much everything that's electrified in their lineup for quite some time. They started with the A3 E-Tron, which was this electrified little hatchback, and it was, I think, pretty cool, but you know, that's not what's going to sell in volume. So then they came out with the E-Tron, which is probably what you've seen this referred to before, because that's what this is. This is Out Motorsports, the channel for cars as you are. My name is Jake, and this is, for 2024, the Audi Q8 E-Tron Sportback. So Audi's called this thing E-Tron for several years now since it first came out, but now they've got many E-Trons in their lineup, and calling this one E-Tron when they're starting to use A's and SQs and Qs like they do with their internal combustion cars, it just was getting really confusing. So what they're trying to say here is this is the Q8 E-Tron. This is the biggest one they sell in their crossover lineup. They've got the Q4 E-Tron as well. They're coming out with more, they're conceptualizing more, both as crossovers and sedans. So they did make some other updates to this for 2024, and that is what we're going to talk to you all about today, because I'm actually a big fan of these. They're not especially sporty, but they are quite lovely in a lot of other ways. So I want to talk about what they've changed for 2024 and then why I like this, and we'll get behind the wheel and see, of course, how it is to drive. Okay, so first of all, we're going to talk about styling updates for the 2024 Q8 E-Tron. I don't normally talk styling, but in this case, the styling improved the performance, so I care about it a whole lot. So Audi worked on different things up front and on the sides of the car to improve the coefficient of drag. It's down by 6%, which to me is pretty huge, and they did that because they're chasing range. These cars were not known for the best range. The older ones were good for about 220 miles, give or take, and Audi knew they needed to really step things up. Now, they did work on the battery as well. We'll get to that in a second, but the styling does play a part. So up front here, you'll notice a new grille versus the older E-Trons, and it's got kind of this self-closing bottom end of the grille, which works for aero, which kind of helps move the air differently. And then they went to a two-dimensional set of rings on the front grille. Now, I don't love this because the Audi rings are something that always kind of stands out and says, this is an Audi. These are really subtle, and they're gray, not silver. They're very subtle here. This is where all the sensors are for all your front, driver assistance gear. I don't love this look, to be totally honest. I don't talk about styling much, but this doesn't say Audi to me like the older rings did. They also added a light bar at night, which lights up across the top here, and it kind of illuminates the top of this, which again, I don't think it says Audi that much. But this, plus the refinements to the sides of the vehicle, they messed with kind of the wheel arches and things on the Sportback in particular, fixed that coefficient of drag and got it down by 6%, which I think is fantastic. So moving on from the nose of the Q8 E-Tron and adding some range with better efficiency and aerodynamics there, what else did they do to get more range out of the Q8 E-Tron? Well, they were able to add more density to the battery. So what that means is that you can store more energy in there than in past years of E-Tron. So the prior model years that were just called E-Tron could hold 95 kilowatt hours of electricity, whereas this one, if it's called Q8 E-Tron, it can hold 114 kilowatt hours. So that is truly just more juice in the same size battery pack. Now that is fantastic, of course, but the other thing they did is they worked on the motor on the back axle. So these cars are all quattro. They have one electric motor on each axle. The rear motor is going to be the one that powers the car primarily, with the front kicking in to help as needed. And in this case, Audi added 2 more windings to the rear motor. Now that's probably not going to mean a lot to most of you, myself included, but point being, the motor can generate more of a magnetic force with the same amount of energy compared to the prior motor, thus it is more efficient. Now all of that adds up to nearly a 30% increase in range. These cars are finally rated for right about 300 miles versus, like I mentioned, about 220 in years past. Now power and torque are unchanged from prior years of E-Tron, which means 355 horsepower and 414 pound-feet if you're driving with the transmission selector in drive. If you put it into S for sport, you get an extra little boost that shows on your gauge cluster, and that means you're now good for 402 horsepower and 490 pound-feet of torque. Now, performance otherwise is tweaked just a touch. Audi wanted to make this thing feel a little bit more agile as they transition into being part of their regular big E-Tron family. And what they did is they quickened the steering ratio on the steering rack, they modified the front control arm bushings, and they tweaked the stability programming on the software end of things. So it should feel a little more agile, but we'll get it out on some back roads here and talk about that in just a second. Now, suspension and brakes have carried over unchanged from prior years. The suspension in these cars is indeed adaptive, which, yay, we love that. And the brakes are going to be a 6-piston caliper up front and a single piston caliper out back with some gigantic rotors both front and rear. And then finally, we have to talk about this whole Sportback thing. I'm not a personal fan of Sportbacks or these, coupe SUVs in general. Audi's not the only one making these. I just really don't love them because for me, a utility vehicle should be utilitarian and be basically as boxy as possible, because otherwise, why are you bothering? Just get a sports car or a sedan or, whatever. But for people who want this, it is indeed an option. And what I love is that Audi is offering both. So if you want something this size, but you don't want it to be Sportback shaped, you can also get a regular Q8 E-Tron that will be a little more squared off in the back. It will hold a little bit more cargo. And that is nice because when you pop the back here, it is indeed a bit compromised. I've had some issues putting things in the back of this car simply because of how sloped this is. It's really hard if you have a big cooler or, a tent, some chairs, anything that you might bring that's kind of boxy and kind of hard-sided that isn't very flexible, you might have some trouble with. From what I understand, the basic roofline, the headroom for second row passengers is roughly the same, but it's where that cargo space is concerned that you really lose something with the Sportback. But if you love this look, this is indeed something that you can purchase, and if you really hate it like I do, you can just get the regular Q8 E-Tron. Now we also have to talk charging with the Q8 E-Tron, and for that we're gonna go straight to the second EV charger I tried because the first one didn't work, and let's talk about the experience over there. All right, and on the third try, we were at the third station with probably the 9th charger of the day between all of them. We're finally getting some actual DC fast charging. So I started out at Electrify America headquarters in Reston, Virginia. They're about 30 minutes from where I live, and I had to go out that way anyway, and that was not going well. One of the 4 stations was down, the other 3 wouldn't connect to the car and start charging at all. Then I went to an EVGo station, and the first charger I tried would only output about 50 kilowatts. Then I moved to another one that wouldn't connect, and the third one was doing about 84 kilowatts. I'm like, look, this thing, they say it'll do 170 kilowatts of charging speed, and clearly something is not right here. So then I've come to this Target, which you can see here in the background, maybe. There's a Target there. And anyway, it's finally outputting 120 kilowatts of charging speed at this Electrify America station. So still took 3 tries to get the car connected and talking to the station and happy. And it's been kind of difficult. And in any case, I finally got some actual DC fast charging-ish speed. I would love to see this go closer to 170 like Audi says it will do. And I don't quite know what the charge curve is on this car, but in any case, at 30 to 35% battery, which is where I started, right about 30%, it's been doing 120 kilowatts of speed. So good enough, but again, not quite what they promised. So in any case, I'm gonna run and buy some paper towels and some other things for my home, and we'll be good to go as soon as I'm done. So let's talk driving the Audi Q8 E-Tron Sportback. And first of all, we're just gonna talk driving dynamics, get all that out of the way, and I'm gonna start with power and torque because like I said, this has that boost mode, so I have the transmission selector in sport, not drive, because that unlocks that extra power and torque. I have the drive select in dynamic because I'm on back roads. I figure let's get the suspension and steering and everything cranked all the way up to maximum attack just to give it a shot. And then as soon as I crest this hill, I'm gonna go ahead and pin it and just see how it feels, because I don't need to be jumping Audi's car. So it is powerful, it is torquey to a point. There's plenty of both, but the car doesn't throw you back in your seat, and I don't think Audi is going for that here. They're trying to just make this feel like a very nice, pleasant place to spend time, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But now we need to talk about steering and braking, because this is not dynamically, they're not going for sporty here, and it's pretty obvious. The steering is quicker than before, everything is sharper than before, but that doesn't make it a sports car, and Audi's not really claiming it is. So, throwing it into some really tight turns, it's got a little understeer. The steering goes from pretty heavy, which is kind of artificially added in dynamic mode, to lighter, and a little touch of understeer there. And the chassis is composed enough, but it doesn't want to be thrown around. You can tell. It's more just looking to be a good cruiser, and that is what this thing excels at. As I'm slowing down for some of these turns, the other thing to talk about is the brakes, and Audi has this set up to be, again, very car. It's not gonna feel like many other EVs where it has one pedal driving, because this doesn't really do it. So it will eventually start regenerating power and slowing you down if you're off throttle enough, but it will not come to a full stop with your foot just off the throttle. I mean, I guess it will if you have a long enough distance to go, but generally it won't. It's not going to be like a Tesla or something like that. Now, you do have these two paddles that feel like shift paddles on the steering wheel. You've got a plus and a minus, and if you're off throttle, you can give it up to 2 clicks of the minus paddle, and it will fairly aggressively regenerate and slow you down, and it will eventually bring you to a stop. And I wish it would do more of a one-pedal experience, because I think that is part of the charm of an EV. Once you get used to it, it is pretty cool, and you can kind of have this challenge of how little can I use the actual brake pedal. And so conveniently, those are the next 2 words I want to talk about: brake and pedal. So when you get on the brake pedal itself in this car, which you're going to be doing often, it's got what I think is kind of a wooden feel to it, in that it doesn't really give you a whole lot of feedback, and it feels the same from basically when you start applying it to as you push all the way through, but in a way that's a little firm. It's a little something, and it's not giving me what I want. So that to me is a little bit of a disappointment, because it just feels not super confidence inspiring. I know this has plenty of brakes. I've driven other EVs that are heavy like this car. This is a fairly heavy vehicle, and I've driven plenty of them that feel very under braked and not confidence inspiring in that way. This, by comparison, feels like it will stop, but you don't really know how much brake you're giving the car. So it's just a little hard to figure that out, and I think they could dial in a little bit more feel there without really compromising too much else otherwise. And then if we just put this back into drive and put the drive select mode back to comfort, that's where the Q8 E-Tron really shines for me. This is more of a, rolling isolation chamber than anything. In fact, I think it is supremely quiet in here. I was out with a friend last night prior to thinking about filming all this, and we had the windows down because it was a nice night, and there was someone at a red light next to us on a motorcycle playing music very loudly, and we were trying to have a conversation. So we rolled all the windows up and closed the sunroof, and I was astonished at how it completely blocked out the music. It was really, really surprising to me. I knew it would do something, but I didn't realize it was that well insulated. And in fact, Audi says that this is as quiet, if not quieter, than their flagship A8 luxury sedan. So really, really impressive there. And then, in general, this is a comfortable, nice place to be. This one is the launch edition, so you'll see these seats are a little different in style versus a lot of the other Q8 E-Trons you'll see. These have that kind of orange stitching going on, but in general, this is going to be the same as a Q8 E-Tron Prestige, the fully loaded model. And in that case, that means you've got heated, ventilated seats up front here with massagers. They are lovely, very comfortable over long periods of time. I really enjoyed those. The other sort of cabin accoutrement in here are all pretty nice. You've got 3 big screens, which I don't love the third one, but the digital cockpit directly in front of you is pretty good. You can configure that a whole lot of different ways. You've got your main infotainment screen, which I do like. It's got haptic feedback if you're using all the built-in Audi stuff, and then it's got CarPlay and Android Auto that is not haptic, it's just touch, but pretty easy to use. It's a good system. The only thing I don't love is further down this second screen. It's part of your center stack. I just don't think is very helpful. It's kind of replacing regular climate controls that use buttons and knobs, and I don't really understand the point. I've used this on several higher end Audis. The lower tier Audi vehicles, no matter what you're driving, tend to have buttons and knobs, and I think they do a very fine job versus the touchscreen. So I just don't understand the benefit of the touchscreen, to be totally honest, but it works fine. It's kind of out of the way. You can dim it all, so at night it's not super bright. And then, further down, the shifter is good, easy to figure out. You've got this kind of palm rest here for everything, and it kind of keeps your right hand grounded with several key controls, even if you're trying to keep your eyes up on the road and deal with a lot of things that are touch controlled. So that all works pretty well. You've got your volume control and track control down here, plus the shifter, some parking buttons, and then your climate control on that screen. So all pretty easy to deal with. The sound system in here is Bang & Olufsen. It is, again, pretty good. I'm a fan of that. And, it's just a nice place to spend a lot of time. I think that's what Audi is going for. It's pretty large in here. You can fit 4 6-footers pretty comfortably. And, this would be a fine car for a family or for road trips or whatever. I think the range, like I said, is finally at a point where it makes sense to try and road trip one of these, more than a lot of people would be comfortable doing before. So generally pretty impressed. Obviously, dynamically, this is not a sporty car, but again, Audi's not pushing it as one. So, it's composed enough. It's just not going to be that as your primary focus, but it doesn't have to be. And the fact that it's just so nice in here is why I really like getting to drive one of these every time I do. So, are there some difficulties with charging? Yeah. Are there some things that I don't love about the Sportback part? Yeah. Is it not super sporty first? No. Do I care? Not at all. It is still a very, very nice car, and I would just get the one that's not the Sportback, because personally, it's not what I love. All right, that is it for this review of the 2024 Audi Q8 E-Tron Sportback. As always, thank you so much for coming along. Be sure to like, share, comment, subscribe right here on YouTube. Give us a follow on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, now X, at Out Motorsports. And if you'd like to meet fellow LGBT automotive enthusiasts and motorsports competitors, head over to outmotorsports.com. We've got a whole group over there. Would love to be your new best friends, meet you online and at our in-person events coming up throughout this year and into early next. Till next time, please stay safe, be well. See you for the next one.